to place ourselves in our major story. Last week was the class about the parts, that rational and irrational parts, or that was 2 weeks ago?
That was 2 weeks ago.
Last week was about okay. Yeah, so these are all akdamas. Well, the 2 weeks ago one was like a very specific thing already, like ethics. It really was like getting ahead of myself. Well, it was a good concept. But more generally, what we're up to is that we have this goal, and we're giving half a year or something like that to figure it out. And it's to figure out what the Aristotelian account of the soul is, more or less. And that's very important because for us Eden it's very important, because like half of our teachers accepted that, at least halfway or somehow. And it informs everything that happened since then. So you need to understand what's going on. That's why it's important. And it's also maybe true, but that's another whole level of discussion. First we have to understand what's going on before we decide if it's true, right? Yeah, it's also useful in contemporary debates. People think that it's useful because we get the hunting discussions about souls are sort of very stuck in very weird loops. Like there's like these two options, like you could be a materialist or not a materialist. And both of these options seem wrong. So many people think that Aristotle has a third option. At least Aristotle himself tries to present himself always as a third option between these kind of radical dichotomies, like where you don't deny that the soul is a thing, and you also don't need to pretend that it's a totally separate thing which has nothing to do with the body and so on. So people think that he has a framework for thinking about that takes us out of this problem. So that's for the philosophical context. But for the Jewish context, which I care about also, it's just very useful because it underlies a ton of what's going on everywhere. And if you don't know about it, then you don't even notice it, and you don't realize what's going on, and then you interpret things in all kinds of weird ways. I'm going to give you a very cute example of this today, hopefully, about the first actuality and second actuality. But it's useful, like they're just like codes, and you notice people using these codes all the time. Some of them know what they're talking about, some of them unfortunately don't, which is another whole discussion. But these codes were all, many of them were invented by Aristotle. There's another whole world of codes which were invented by Plato, and that's another class, in my Monday class that's about that. Okay, and it's in Hebrew. So that's why it's important. That's my sales pitch. So that's what we're trying to do. Now, in order to do this, how we do it, in order to do this, and this is really the entire story. Before we get into the puzzles, like the detailed puzzles, the basic idea is that Aristotle's pshat and what a soul is sort of an implication, or maybe a result, or maybe something that becomes possible by his idea of what everything is. This is true for every philosophy, but it's even more true for Aristotle philosophy. In other words, he thinks that he has a certain concept, mostly, basically these two concepts known as matter and form, and potentiality and actuality, which are the same thing, but they're two concepts at least, and talking about sort of the same thing. And he thinks that since everything in the world works like this, so the soul is just going to be a special case of that. And if we understand the basic metaphysics, or he would call it physics and metaphysics, of that, then we can have a very good tool or concept to understand the soul with, and we don't really need anything else. And that's actually what he thinks solves all the puzzles that everyone else had, and so on. Now, of course, after that, we get into how many parts does it have, and how many activities does it do, and so on. But that's the basic mahalach. And he does this himself, so therefore, before we get into the details, we need to at least know what his basic framework that he's working with is, right? And Aristotle, if you read this chapter, and this is a trick for reading Aristotle very often, he literally does this. He gives you his empty, like a box, like a list of boxes. Says these are the boxes in which everything that exists must fit in, and that he always assumes that he sort of proved that or showed that it makes sense somewhere else. And then he starts showing you why everything must fit into those boxes. So that's
just the preliminary question.
Mahalach, how it works.
This book on the soul, is it dedicated to any particular, like you said that there are disciplinary divisions in Aristotle?
This one is dedicated. That was in book 1. It's dedicated to the soul. In other words,
As
and
opposed to what?
it doesn't it as it is.
As it is, okay.
And a few what it's not the things that it's mostly not dedicated to as not as the body is, and we have to decide exactly what the definition of body is, but not as the matter of the body is, and in some way not as it all kind of not everything that it does. One of the things that he totally doesn't care about in this book is, for the most part, are emotions, or really what everything he would put into what we learned last week or 2 weeks ago into the category of the, he doesn't really discuss that. He does discuss what it is to be a soul. That's basically the whole book. What it is to be a soul. It discusses perception, it discusses senses, discusses knowledge. It doesn't discuss medical science, which is like the science of animals, the parts of animals in a different book. But it doesn't neatly fit into one of his, actually this is a problem, it doesn't neatly fit into one of his categories of knowledge, because the soul is something that sort of rides on a few different ones. In other words, it's not entirely it's not entirely metaphysical, because the soul, according to him, is not entirely metaphysical, at least not most of it. And it's also not physical. So, and it's also not both. Like, he wouldn't say that he's discussing the body and soul paired, because that's the animal. He's not discussing the animal, he's discussing what a soul is. So it's somewhat only halfway fits into his divisions of sciences. But in the most clear answer that you could say is that he's discussing the soul as the soul, as what it is for be a soul.
Soul.
Basically the metaphysical status of the soul is the basic question that he cares about. In other words, like the questions that he puts in the beginning are something like things like we said, does the soul survive death? Which translates to him, does the soul separate? Can the soul be separate from the body? Does the soul have parts? Is it divisible? All kinds of things like that. So you understand what kind of things he's interested in. He's not interested in what we would call a science question, which is like, according to him, the question doesn't work. But like, if there's a soul, how does it go into the body? Like, does it have a pipe or things like that? Or the body, what kind of pipes it has? He's not interested in that. Okay, and this is also, but now let's be clear, this is also what we should be interested in, right? The reason we did a whole thing about this, right? The reason why we talk about souls is for the soul reasons, for the metaphysical reasons, right? In other words, it becomes into like a religious reason, which isn't only interesting in a limited way, like we discussed for reward and punishment and things like that. But in the broader sense, it really answers the question of what it is to be a person and what it is to have a perfect human life, which is what a soul is, according to him at least. So it becomes, right? So now, going back to what I was saying, so the definition of what everything is, or what definitions are, and what things are, and what kind of things there are, is even more important for him, for his explanation of soul, than it is for many other people, right? Everyone, now let me explain what I'm saying. Any theory of what the soul is going to be an implication of a theory of what everything is, right? For example, we did Tzaddik Goin says, if everything is created, then the soul is also created, because it's one of the everything, right? If some things are not created, then maybe the soul is one of the not created things, and so on. But that doesn't tell us what kind of a thing the soul is, right? It just tells you that it must be one of the kinds of things that exist, but it doesn't tell you what the kind of thing it is. In Aristotle, because of his theory of matter and form and of potentiality and actuality, which is how he defines everything, it's like his most general categories of being, at least in some sense, or we could say the 10 categories are, but anyways, the fact, not only the soul is in one of these categories, and then we'll just have a discussion of what kind of thing the soul is. It's actually these categories, or these kinds of being, that help us explain what a soul is. And some people would say explain away what a soul is, but it helps us explain what a soul is. If we wouldn't have the concept of matter and form, we have no way of understanding what a soul is, because a soul is a kind of thing that only exists, according to him, according to the concept of a form. And if you understand what a form is, you'll only be able to understand what a soul is. So the soul is not just a form, it's basically the form. Well, the form of, then we could, that gets into the particular question of what is the human soul, is the form of, and so on.
Form?
What does mean privileged?
What do you mean when you say it's the form?
And all I'm saying is, Yeah, that's the specific question that
Not the form proper,
that he asks about this. Well, that's the specific question, but the point is that it's somewhat different from like, if you have Sadego, and you don't need to understand what created means to understand that what the soul is, because just you need to, if you have everything being created, then the soul is a created thing. Now that doesn't tell us anything about what kind of thing the soul is. We have to look. Well, there's 10,000 kinds of created things. Now figure out which one it is or what kind of thing it is. Right? It's not an inherent part of the explanation that things are created. I mean, in some sense it is, but that's not very helpful for the problem of the soul. All the problems like how does the soul relate to the body and so on. All these problems, all the puzzles about soul don't get solved by saying that it's a created thing, right? For Aristotle, all the puzzles about the soul get solved by saying the soul is the form of a living body, and whatever exactly he says. It basically, the greatest category, the kind of thing that it is solves all the questions that everyone else has, and according to him, the reason why everyone else is confused is because they don't have his metaphysical structures, they don't have his concepts, and that's really why they're confused. If you would understand that there's such a thing called a matter and a form and a potential, then you would just apply that. Of course, that application has some details to be worked out, but the basic solution for all the problems is just applying that. So it's much more important, and this is why, and again we can get into debates, and you could have a different shitta that just eclectically takes things from Aristotle and not his shitta, but this is why you can't say that you were working with his definition of soul without accepting, without working, without understanding his definition of matter and form. That's just not going to work ever. And maybe that's another reason why, in other words, if you read, and the same way, just to be very clear, if you read Rambam or anyone that says that they accept this definition of soul, at least to some extent, and you don't know that, and you say, well, I understand what he's saying when he says about soul. No, you don't understand. Because what he says only makes sense working with his basic definitions or with his basic metaphysics, okay? Even more than any other shitta, that's what I'm saying. So that's why the basic method, the basic Kesdrem has to be in figuring out the basic, these concepts, and then seeing how it works with the soul, and maybe there's some new problems that it arises when you apply this. But that's how
the I guess a priori soul assumption that we spoke about, I think, in the first class, right? That everybody thinks that there's something called a soul. This is just seen to be as like a property of the world, and then analysis starts with that being the object of discussion. Right, but for Aristotle, it kind of...
No, that's true also for him, because it's only interesting to have the soul, all these things, because it explains something.
Without it, it just wouldn't have such a...
No, the human soul or the animal soul. It's interesting because if you don't, let's say something... No, this is not true. In other words, you don't get there. The metaphysics help you solve the problems that people have. Just to be clear, if you understand, and which is just a metaphysical assumption, but I'm going to be clear about that, but if you start by saying... if you don't assume, let's say something like this, if you don't assume that life is a thing, you don't take that as a basic category, then
life, okay.
Yeah, take the word life, which is what soul means. Then the whole question doesn't begin. And you could call that a sort of theory of soul, but that's not. He takes that as the data. He never questions that there is such a thing as life and that it's a thing.
Okay.
And it can't be reduced. Like, for example, if you're a reductionist, I mean, he does sort of this, maybe he does discuss quasi-reductionist materialist theories, and he has reasons why he doesn't agree with them, and then he would call that a sort of theory of soul. But the point is that his theory, the problems that his theory solves, are only problems. The question only begins if you assume that there's such a thing as life. I think that's true. And that's unlike what people consider to be modern science, at least doesn't have that assumption. And therefore, the question doesn't really begin. It only begins regarding the mind, which nobody really is sure that it's actually material. But if we just believe that everything is material, then the question actually doesn't begin. So in other words, the problem with a kind of materialist, not the problem, the place where he differs from materialist explanations is not really in the theory of the soul. It's more that he disagrees with their data. Okay. For him, it's a basic fact about the world that some things are alive and that living things have a different. Yeah, but that's just an explanation of what kind of a thing being alive is.
What kind of thing has a form correspond? What kind of thing has its explanatory principle? Whatever is going to be what we call that soul, because it's different than the form of something that's inanimate, right?
Exactly, and if you don't think that that's different, there's any difference to explain, then you don't need.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And if you think that what we call living things are just slightly more complicated dead things. So there's no such a thing as living things. So maybe you still need a form for dead things too. I'm not saying that you don't, but that's another discussion, right? But
that would fall under a much more that's not categorically different than the form of a tree, the form of a dead, but not a tree. Let me use it.
For him, it's categorically different. This book is not about the forms of trees. Let's be very clear.
I understand.
It's not about the forms of trees. It's not about the forms of rocks.
Right, and it's not about the forms of carcasses in the same way.
Yeah, but
the thing is, because the form of a carcass doesn't distinguish itself in the form of a rock in any.
That's a specific question, somewhat. But the point, that's a certain specific question. But for sure, he assumes that there's something called life that needs an explanation. Again, explanation might not be the correct word because he doesn't entirely actually explain. He really defines what it is. It doesn't give you a thing that causes the life different than other. That's where it's different from.
Not explaining it mechanically, meaning
No, it doesn't give you this thing. Okay, but that's not the point. The point is, you do have to assume, and these are metaphysical assumptions, like I say. Of course, these are metaphysical assumptions, and you could go back and say, yes, it doesn't help to say that a soul is a kind of rock, because rocks also have form. Now you might say, well, there's not maybe someone that could be like an Aristotelian. That's why you could be a hylomorphist. You could have matter form and deny that there's a specific living matter form. That's would be another piece of data that he just assumes is true. That the world, he's nobody seems to disagree. According to him, it doesn't seem like anyone really disagrees that there is living things and not living things. They disagree what that means. Okay. But nobody disagrees that there's such a thing. If you totally disagree that there's such a thing, then you might have to have matter and form, just like anything else, but you don't have to have a soul. A soul is a specific kind of form.
For him,
it's not the same thing as saying just form.
The form is also very much regulating the potential.
Okay, wait. Okay. You're saying things that I don't know yet. I need to start from zero, right?
Okay.
So let's go back to zero. All I said is that we need to have these basic terms or basic concepts working in order to follow anything that goes on. And now you added something, which is that, yes, we also need to have, and we did a different class about that, we also need to have something of the same data, right, of the same facts that we're trying to explain. And, of course, how to interpret the data is in itself a metaphysical, so it's metaphysics all the way down. But he does assume that there's something called living things that need to be explained or dealt with.
But they have to be dealt with differently than a rock, because they change with a certain trajectory, right?
What if, again, you're giving the definition. The point is, because they are everyone agrees, and this is for him, everyone outside the school also agrees that living things are different than non-living things. And nobody thinks, or he at least denies the theory, that living things are just the same as non-living things and just have jumping higher or whatever.
Right.
That's true. That's another thing.
See, but part of what the soul, I'm just going to animal soul, because I don't know if we want to explain that before human soul, but just from what I understand of it, is that at the end of the day, a monkey starts off as, let's say, a fetus monkey, and then it grows into a full-size monkey, and it doesn't grow into a full-size raccoon.
Okay, and therefore...
Right? So the soul is...
Okay, now you're giving more pieces of data to explain, or what is the...
I know, what I'm saying is the soul of a living thing is also governing its
that's part of me. That's part variety, of that. Right? Those are again. Now you're getting into what does it mean to be alive, or
I don't know what it means to be the form of it.
I don't know. I don't know anything yet. You're asking me a very advanced question.
Okay.
All these little things are just parts. All these things are parts of being alive. Now we could divide being alive into a whole bunch of things. Yeah.
But it's not. Identity is, you're saying, not the exhaustive description of it, meaning
what the thing that makes a small person the same thing as the adult.
A baby monkey and an adult monkey.
But that's not interesting. That's not what the soul question is about. What makes a book is the same question, or what makes a table a table.
It's form, right?
Yeah, but again, that's not enough, right? We need to have that's what I'm saying. These are two things that you need to have. You need to have a concept of form, which according to him solves all the puzzles, but you also need to agree that's not a form. Again, according to him, it's going to be a specific kind of form, and that it being a specific kind of form is what solves most of the questions everyone else has about it. But that's not his chiddush, right? You need to agree, or everyone assumes prior to their having discussions that there are such a thing as living things.
Right. Yeah. I'm not contesting that. What I'm saying is a living thing. Saying things that are living also are subject to different. I'm saying part of what this is trying to figure out is change, right? Like we said.
Again, no, it's not trying to figure out change. No, yes, in general, in general, yes, in general. I'm
not trying to move out of
in general. What we're not getting exactly, but you start talking about particular things. That's what I'm trying to distract. In general, we need matter and form, and the reason we need it for a whole bunch of reasons. Yes, but yeah, exactly. But I'm not, the point. And that's fine. You need it to explain change and so on. But and human and life is a certain kind of change. Yeah, that's all going into the same boxes, right? If there's something explains change, this is a certain kind of change. Then now we have the tools to work with what kind of change this is or what kind of movement it is, and so on. But that's beside it. But that's okay. Anyways, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Now, so what are the things that we need to know? Like we said, there's some data that we assume that we need to have agree on that to make sense. But mostly, we're not worried about that right now. We need to know these concepts. They need to at least sort of make sense to us, right? Now, and he gives this list himself, okay? So, and he sort of starts with this question, what is the soul? And I try to explain what the question is, but that's not for today. And we start off saying what is, right? And now, for what is, he has a list, and I have a list of 4 things. 3 which are 4. 3 things, or 3 or 4 things, each of which should be like a whole class or something, which we need to know about, okay? The first thing is the concept of substance, okay? And this is the theory of the book of categories. Basically, it's all about that. And the basic idea is that there's 2 kinds of things in the world. Substance things and not substance things, right? Let me just make the list. And we have to figure out which one the soul is about. Okay, the second thing is what we call matter and form. Third thing is what we call potentiality and actuality. And the fourth thing is a detail in that, which is that there are 2 kinds of actuality or 2 kinds of potentiality. Depends on which side of the thing you want to look at, and the soul is one of them. That's really where I wanted to get today. I think that we talk about all the other things already.
And substance is not something that requires matter and form, like that's not a thing.
Yeah, but again, these are 2 separate.
The 2 separate categories.
Everything turns into the same thing, and then
these are categories of is that apply to each
these are
object?
not. These are the distinctions which are in each other, right? It's not different. The list of things are not side by side, so right?
It does go in a
pyramid. There's a pyramid, of course. Somewhat. Okay. The point is, firstly, try to explain for a second. Okay, the idea of substance was that. And again, according to him, they solved like a bunch of puzzles. He didn't really explain in the book of categories which puzzles it solves, but he seems to think that it's an amazing idea. And it's an idea that he invented in Hebrew known as etzem and mikra, and you find it in every Jewish book written since Aristotle's times. Almost.
Substance and accident.
Yes, otherwise known as essence or substance and accident. And the point of it was that we have a whole bunch of did I ever give a class about this? I don't remember. The point of it is that the word is means a lot of things. Okay, I could say he is white, and that's one thing, and I could say he is a human, and that's another thing, another kind of thing to say. And I could say he is Yitzchok, and so on. And I could say a lot of ises, and basically let's get at the question: what is being? What is? And his most important distinction here. He comes up with 10 meanings of the words is. The most important distinction that I go is that there are things that are for themselves. So they have, they really are, basically. They are the basic...
Is it like an existential statement? Like it's like exists?
I don't know what that means. The point is there are things that are sort of sufficient in themselves. So they have existence by themselves. You could talk about another word. The basic way to understand is that you could say the word without saying another word, right? That's what substance means. And versus accident, which he divides into 9 different kinds, right? Are things that don't make sense without another thing. Basic, which really exactly predicates, which can't exist. Right. Therefore, according to him, can't exist. So according to him, white, a color or a quantity. Right. or and so on. All these things, there's no white in the world. There's white paint, but that's not whiteness, right? So there's no whiteness in the world. There's only whiteness of, right? And that's what's called an accident. Accidents are not what we call they're not the thing. They're not things. They're things about things, or facts about things, or relationships about things, or all kind of different things about things, but they're not things. Okay, now you could have a theory of the soul which says that the soul is an accident. There's basically a theory in the Philo, Simius theory, that's a harmony or something like that, and he has arguments against it. But the point is, that's the first question, right? If this what we call soul is not a thing, then it's not really interesting to talk about at all. It's just a thing about another thing. Now, it's very important to remember that form for him is also a thing about another thing, because there's no forms in themselves. There's only forms of. But form is not an accident. Why is form not an accident? Because form is actually what makes that thing into a thing. So it's not. I hope these words make sense.
Yeah.
So it's not. So it's. And some people made this mistake. We saw that Tzaddik made this mistake, or at least seem to think that people that say that the soul is form are saying that it's an accident. But no, they're not saying it's an accident. Because an accident, well, another big important thing about accident is that the thing it's about can continue to exist without it. Right? An accident is something that's not part of the definition of a thing, right? And when you say I am white, right, that means that I could have been black. It's very important. That's the sense in which it's an accident. That's why I say it's accidental to him, right? So
something could have been otherwise. The otherwise that it is, whatever's excluded.
That's an accident.
Otherwise,
anything
accidents, right?
Exactly. Anything that I could be otherwise and stop and well, everything could be otherwise. Everything in this world, but I don't stop being what I am, right? If I become white or black, I'm not going to stop being a human being. I might stop being a white human being, but that's just a kind of not even a kind.
Is not contingent on this.
Exactly. It's not part of their definition. Or another way of saying it is, it's not. They don't need that to be what they are.
I don't have the is without a head, let's say, attached to my body or something.
Without a
head attached to my body, or without me being what I am.
Right, okay, without exactly. For example, if the definition of human is a rational being, rational animal, then if you stop being rational, then you're basically a cat. Now, what if a human loses his mind? Okay, that's a silly question. Not meaning he's still a rational being, but assuming that he's not, then he's not. Then he's a cat, basically. Or that's really what makes a cat, a human. That a cat doesn't think and human thinks. But if you take a human and you give him a different hat, then he just stays human. And if you give him the cut of his hands, he still stays human. So even though having hands is somewhat essential to being human, but I
understand it as a defect of the thing still existing.
Yeah, beside it, we're jumping a lot of things. The point is, accidents can go away without destroying the thing they're about, the thing they're on. He calls it sometimes. Okay, and that's why. What did I say? That's why a form is definitely not an accident. It is the exact opposite of an accident in this sense. Form is the essence of the thing. Right? Forms are just a word for what actually makes the thing a thing. So what makes human is the human form, which we could define by saying it's a rational animal or whatever exactly it means to be a human form. But therefore, it's not an accident. It's not a fact about a human body, because there's no human body without human forms. Right? When you take away the form, that's a simple way of saying it. When you take away the form, the thing actually goes away entirely. Nothing is left of it. Something entirely different gets created. So forms are not about accidents. It's very important to remember. In other words, there's substance and there's not substance. These are the most basic categories of being. And substance means matter and form. That's really the relation between these two different distinctions.
In which part of it? Participate in the matter?
In whichever. In both, maybe in the more. That's another. Okay. All kind of details. The point is, that's a totally different distinction. That's why I'm saying the relation, you shouldn't make people keep on getting confused with these things. We have this distinction between substance and not substance. Okay?
Count John Locke is one of those.
Distinction number one, right? And distinction number two is about, we get to is about matter and form. We didn't really explain it yet, but I'm just making very clear that matter and form are a distinction about substance. Now, some forms are accidents. These are questions that a lot of Aristotelians got very confused or mechilik about. Are all forms substantial? Maybe there's forms of accidents. All these questions are details. But what everyone agrees is that forms and matter are the substance, right? And maybe accidents also have forms and matter. But the whole accident is not an instant is not a real thing. So it doesn't really help. Form doesn't make you into a real thing. Having a form doesn't make you into a substance, right? But a substance is a matter and a form, just to be clear. There might be an accidental forms. There might be forms of whiteness. There might be such a thing. But that's just not a substance. Still doesn't make you a substance. Form and matter do not correspond to matter, to substance and accident in any way. Okay. Form and matter are both about substance, and maybe also about non-substance, but that's going to be confusing. But they're for sure, Aristotle for sure says they're about substance. They are what substance is. Substance is what a thing is, and what the thing is its matter and form. So it's really the same thing. So when you say substance, and you could sometimes he says it like people say it in this way. When you say substance, I mean matter and form, and in some way more the form of the matter even, because the form is what tells me what it is and the definition of it. Matter is just what it's made of, or some. But definitely says usually both. For a substance is matter and form. Okay. Right, so that's number one. Okay, if the soul is just a fact about something else, so to speak, about the body, right, which is what people would say, then just another way of saying the form doesn't exist. The soul doesn't exist. I'm sorry, the soul doesn't exist, right? And those people would have to say something weird, which is that the soul could go away if they really
and everything else can be
and the body stays a person.
Okay.
Right? Maybe you could say that, but that's the idea. Or maybe there's no such thing as a soul and so on. Okay. That's really why he's not so happy. And again, there's a whole chapter of arguments with this kind of theory, which is the soul is a harmony, and there's a harmony of what and so on. Okay.
That's the Verus, right?
No. Verus are kind of Aristotelians. Don't.
Right, I thought that I thought that their soul is.
No. Okay, so you're not allowed to say things. The people that say this are, again, matter and reductionist, materialist, eliminativist, say something like it. Some kind of atomist maybe say things like this. But whatever, all kinds of people say things like that, but that's not relevant to set. Point is, that's a different discussion. We sort of started arguing mostly against the theory that the soul is an accident. Now we have, so that's important. So we need to know where to put it, in which substance to put it. And Aristotle doesn't really argue for this. He says, because he starts with the body, that's why, I'm not sure why. You have to figure out, I didn't figure out why. But he sort of says, everyone agrees that the body is a substance. Body is the most substance of anything, like body, because that's what things basically are.
The body, like the human body?
No, body in general. Then we get to the human body and exactly. Okay, I'm going to get to this in a minute. But the point is, that's how we get that soul into the box of substance and not into the box of not substance. But that's just the boxes. I'm just giving you the boxes, okay? And these, like I said, if you're Jewish, you've heard of this concept of etzem and mikra. Like people say things like, right? The most classic example of someone using this in literally the Aristotelian sense, although Aristotle would never agree with the Dvart, but they would say, like someone would say, Yisrael Yisrael, which Beid Ramaral says this. What does it mean? So basically means that to be Jewish is a kind of essence, and what you do are just accidents. So whatever you do, they change your accidents, they change a lot of things, but you still stay what you are. Because you can't change what you are. What you are is the definition of it. You can change what you are by being destroyed, by stopping to exist. That's the only way you could change what you are. But as long as you exist, then you're still what you are. So this gets used in thousands of such concepts of and that's why people call this being essentialism. Nowadays people are against essentialism because they want to change that, and really that's not really a problem. But okay, that's another political.
What's not a problem though?
Essentialism doesn't mean that you can change. It's not just Essentialism just says that there is there are the two kinds of change. There's change which you stay what you are and you became a different, somewhat like you acquire new accidents, and then there's change where you destroy what you were. Both of them are possible. There's no reason why. Essentialism doesn't mean that things are set, that nobody, in other words, in my example of a Yid and a Goy, it doesn't really follow from essentialism, even if being a Jew is an essential thing, and not like other people who they're against essentialism, so there's no such thing as essence, it's just an accidental thing, everything is just accident. Even if it's an essential thing, it doesn't mean that it can't be destroyed. It doesn't even mean that it can't be destroyed by your choice. If it's a kind of thing that can be destroyed by your choice, if being a certain kind of person is a kind of thing that you could stop being, then you just stop being it, and you're just totally not. It's just a totally different being. There's no problem with that. But anyways, that's a different... I'm just using it to connect it to something that we know, because otherwise we get lost. These are the idea of accident versus... everyone has these kind of thoughts about themselves anyways. The fact that I'm fat is not really about me. It's just something that happened to me. The fact that I want to be skinny, that's really about me, right? Anyways, and so on. And it's a very natural human way of thinking. And like all of Aristotle's thoughts are basic. Even babies don't think that way. Many. The question is, it's the opposite question. Okay, that's another shtickle. Point is, it's a very normal way of thinking. Okay, then we have the second concept, which is the concept of matter and form, which, as you know, and again, most people that read, you could read a lot of Rambam and things and not really know it because he never like presents the philosophy of it. But matter and form is from the book of physics mostly and metaphysics, but they were presented to solve the problem of change, which was Parmenides and the pre-Socratics problem, and Socrates, but the pre-Socratic problem, Plato. The pre-Socratics had this big problem with change, which for them is basically everything, because everything, nature is basically another word for change. And according to the basic problem that they had, which is very serious, I'm not going to try to explain why it's a real problem, because now these people look at it and they don't understand it's a problem, but that's just because they assume already a certain solution. Just like the Yosef Skashas, like I had a teacher, see, I'm connect everything. I had a teacher that said he doesn't understand the question, because can you tell me how the miracle there's a famous Yosef Skasha, and he said he doesn't understand the question, like how did you explain it before the question? Obviously in one of the ways that are the answer, so why are you asking the question? But the point is that before this was articulated, nobody explained it in that way and just didn't think about it. So that's why there's a question. And of course, it's necessary that it should be one of these ways. If you, okay, I'm not getting into that whole discussion, but if you imagine it, and assuming the assumptions that the Yosef assumes, it's necessarily one of these ways, and there's no other way to imagine it. So therefore, of course, the question doesn't begin. But what he did, that doesn't mean that his question is stupid. His question actually forced you to articulate what you already thought, which is what good questions should do. So good philosophy should, from a reverse perspective, retrospective, should be so obvious that nobody could have thought differently. That's why Aristotle was so successful, because many of the things he said are so obvious that nobody realizes that you could have ever thought differently. And that's why it's still successful, even though people pretend to think differently nowadays. Okay, but that's a different hack. Point is, that's not a real people often when I present this problem, they say, well, that's a stupid question. It's not a stupid question because, how change could work is a stupid question, but it's not a stupid question because you're already assuming a certain answer when you're thinking about it, because you're usually assuming a certain physicalist answer. But the point is, remember the problem with change, right? If nothing could come from nothing, so where did the change come from? Either it came from nothing, so it doesn't exist, or it always existed. These are the basic dilemma about change. Does that make any sense?
Right, and some of the Greeks thought that everything is...
And according to Aristotle, people disagree with him. According to Aristotle, there were both sides of the argument were presented by real people. Some people, the Eleatic people, right, Parmenides and Zeno and those people, they literally denied any change. They said everything is as it always was and always will be. The fact that it looks like things once were one thing and then changed into another thing is just an illusion. And they claimed to have good proofs, and according to that, they have good proofs. Like the Zeno's paradoxes were supposed to be, even Zeno's paradoxes were supposed to be proofs of this, but the basic metaphysical proof is this, that nothing could come from nothing, so basically change can't happen. Okay? And then according to Aristotle, you could go to the other extreme and say that nothing ever is stable, so there's nothing to change into. Everything, there's only change, basically. That's which he calls the Hercules position, right? You don't step into the same river twice, and so on. So, at least the way he understands it, this means that there's only flux. There's no stable being ever. So that solves it, because basically there's nothing. Okay. Now Aristotle thinks that these are both crazy extremes to go to, and they're both obviously, again, he's Balbatish.
They also might take you back to the question again.
Okay, these are the point is, yeah, maybe. But what I usually say is that he thinks that this is both crazy, and he never likes being crazy. One of his big things is not to get into crazy places.
But okay. I noticed,
I have to get somewhere else. Yeah. Okay, and therefore he thinks that we just have to figure out a way of analyzing change that doesn't lead us into these absurdities. And the way that he figures out is that change needs 3 ingredients. Okay, something to change, something to change into, and changing. Okay.
It's like to change from, to change into, and what is the changing principle, right?
Yes, and change, and the actual changing, and then he says there's always a thing that changes. That's the most important chiddush that we're interested here about matter, and it changes into something, from something into something. So those are the 3 parts clearly. The thing that changes, and that thing that changes doesn't change. That's the important thing. There is a thing that is changeable or changes, but
retains its substance.
But he calls it the underlying thing, the substrate of change, is the thing that changes. So in other words, and he gives always a simplest example of this, right? When you take a piece of clay and you make it into a statue, then you could ask, where did the statue come from? The answer is that it came from the clay. And then where did the clay go? The clay is still there. It's the changeable part of the statue, otherwise known as matter. And where did the form come from? It came from the matter also. It was potentially, and that's what we call potential. It could have been in the matter, and that's where it came from. So those are the three things. So the matter, the potential in the matter, which is called the lack sometimes, and the thing it turns into, which is the form. Because that's where we get the whole concept of matter and form from. Of course, we get it from other places, but he thinks that this is the basic proof, the basic reason why it's useful, the basic thing it does, and it's a very normal way of thinking. And just to make it very clear, we nowadays don't believe that there is change. At least most people. What's standard, like the standard model of people have of the universe, which I think of science, most people sort of agree with this example. They say, yes, of course, like the atoms don't change, they just change figure. In other words, the form.
There's nothing acquired.
According to most the standard people's understanding nowadays, they say when I ask you where did the tree go when you made it into a table, you say, well, the tree is still there. It just changed organization, right? Or like basically the atoms that made up the tree are always still there, right? And some people, we even claim to have like this principle of conservation of matter and so on, that matter never changes. That's basically denying change. In other words, you think that change is all an illusion, at least at the atomic level. Nothing actually changes. They're unchanging things, and they just change organization. Well, where does that change come from? That's a good question.
Right.
But basically don't believe that there's change. And according to many modern physicists actually believe this, like there's really no change, at least at the basic level. Is that a coherent position? Is another question. But the point is that I'm just showing you that this is a kind of solution. People in Aristotle's times already had this kind of solution. There's a different kind of solution to the problem, because he thinks that there is change, and it's really weird for him to say that there isn't change, like for these kind of reasons, because not coherent, doesn't answer the question. The point is, he thinks that there is change, and therefore there needs to be something that is just changeable. Matter is not atoms, that's very important. Matter is not the things that they're made out of, and matter is actually changes, right? So therefore matter is pure potentiality. It's changeable. And it's changeable in a certain way, which just means that it already has some kind of form, basically. But different differentiations of matter. That's what gets into the whole.
To limit it. Right?
I don't know why you can only accidents. No, it's forms, not its accidents.
No. I'm saying it's like a pink clay can't turn into a white statue.
Those are forms already, or what he calls potentials, which are in the matter, right?
Those potentials have their own forms?
Somewhat, maybe. What I just said depends on the question of prime matter. Like if you go down, the basic definition of matter is the thing that changed, not a kind of thing. Then to the matter, that's why there's three things in his physics. Says there are three principles of the physics. There's matter, form, and something else, right? And the potential in the matter. These are three things. You need the three things for the world to work. Matter is just changeability. And what makes it changeable in a certain way is its potential. It's another thing, you could think of it as a certain. I don't know exactly how you call that. He calls it a lack in the physics. He calls it a thing that it becomes from, or it's basically, according to many interpretations, it's just a kind of form. Really, it's already a form, because matter without form doesn't exist. That's one pshat, at least in the Mahalach.
But its form is also expressing its
form can be more
changeability.
Yeah. Its form it sort of restricts the changeability into a certain way, and then it could become the next thing, and so on.
Bananas don't become Toyota Camrys.
And so on. Yeah. Okay. Point. Then it gets it, but that's the point of matter and form. Okay, that's what it's useful, and therefore that's what gets us into the third thing. Therefore, we also get the concept of everything being, and this is important, everything being potential and actual, or actual and potential. Now, of course, there's no potential things. Potential just means could be. Could be, that means it doesn't exist. So no potential things actually exist. But they must exist in some way, which we call in a potential way. That's where he figured out that existing is not a binary thing. There's a bullshit. There's at least two kinds of existing, because the potential for a tree for a piece of wood to become a table exists, but doesn't exist. So this is really the hard part.
Potentially.
Yeah, exactly. That's this word.
Yeah.
Potential is just a word for the kind of existence that's not we wouldn't call it existence. But his chiddush, and this is why he thinks that this thing solves the problem that nothing comes from nothing, because it doesn't come from nothing, it comes from potential.
Yeah, and it's funny because you circle back around. I was about to say you don't perceive it, but you do perceive
potential
it.
Potential is a thing. Well, no, you perceive it in your mind. Right, you can't see it. You definitely can't see it. You definitely can't see it. No, you can't see it.
Well,
you cannot see it. No, you can't see it.
Right,
you can't see it. You can analyze everything you see into it.
That it is potential, right? You can see it.
No, you could think about it.
Okay.
You could understand that it exists. That's a basic concept that makes sense. And potential is like one of Aristotle's greatest hits. We still use it in different ways. But potential is just exactly. That's already psychology. But even in physics, it gets used, but in a different way. Yeah, but the point of potential is that it's a kind of existence that doesn't exist. It's like half existence. Okay, that's important. Now, of course, there's a lot of that's the basic, two basic concepts that it always works with. Okay, now there's something more that I said I only halfway understand. Right, I understand the concept, but I don't entirely understand why he needs the soul to be this. We didn't say anything about the soul yet. And then he says that actually being. Or potentially being, depending on which side you look at it. So these things always have a lot of levels. Like if I'm actually a child, I could become, I'm potentially an adult, and I'm potentially an older adult, I'm potentially a Zaida, and so on. So what's actual for one thing is always potential for another thing. And therefore he says something important, which is that there's two kinds of actuality. Okay, and he says that the words that he uses over here, which seems to be at least one of the places where he invents the concept, is that there's actuality like knowing, and there's actuality like thinking. Okay, and this is a very good mushal because it's also a very famous yeshiva shevart. Because in the yeshiva they say that a lamden, a ganev is nicht eine was kein gavenen, it's eine was gamvet. Never heard such a pshat. And the same way, if you call yourself a lamden is not someone that knows how to learn. A lamden is someone that learns. That's such a Torah. It's like a weird analogy. So then the Yeshiva Torah goes, maybe it's a Chassidus Torah, I don't know, that some people claim to be Lamdunim, but they don't learn much. Right. They just think that they're very smart. Well, maybe they are. So the Vart goes, if you call yourself a Ganef, do you call yourself a Ganef by virtue of being able to steal, by knowing how to steal? No, you call yourself a Ganef by actually stealing. So you shouldn't call yourself a Lamdun for knowing how to learn. You should call yourself a Lamdun for actually learning. Okay? Now this is the major part. It's not the analogy is Shvachamask, because maybe there's like a difference between a Ganef and a Lamdun. But Aristotle actually thinks about things like this, because this is what he calls the difference between knowing and thinking. A very important difference. So, this is his primary example of it. So must be that it makes sense in this example, and it does, right? Take a person. This is also one of his primary questions, like applied to human being, of change, right? A person didn't know something. It was not Talmud Chacham and not a grammarian, right? And now he knows grammar. Now he's a grammarian, okay? So how did that change happen, right? This is another instance of the problem of change, right? So we analyze it into the same thing. He was potentially, because he had a kind of mind or whatever, kind of soul that can receive knowledge. And then he actualized that potential, right? Okay. But now you think about it, there's really a third step, which is very important. Because knowing, there's a very big difference between knowing how to do grammar and doing grammar. Just like there's a difference between knowing how to any activity of a human being. You cannot know how to and then do it. Exactly. So these are three levels, and three levels of which are in the same chain of actualizing a potential. The acquisition of exactly. So when you learn how to learn, like I keep on doing here, giving prefaces, right? They're only potential. A potential, there's two kinds of potential. Very interesting to notice that there's two kinds of potential. A baby is potentially a scientist, right? I mean, assuming that he has the tools and so on, the talent, because he's a human being, and human beings are potentially, maybe some have more than others, but that's another discussion.
Is that a category that can be applied universally, or just?
Yeah. He thinks that these two potentials are universalizable. But he always uses this. Now, but doesn't seem to be enough, right? So in order to get to using the knowledge, to get to being a scientist. Now, being a scientist, when I say he's being a scientist, or he's doing science, or he's doing grammar, right? That's very different from saying he knows how to do grammar. So you have a potential, but you both have the relation of potential to actual, right? When you first know how are able to learn how. So there's able to learn how to do. These are three things, right?
Okay.
You're able. So you have the capacity, the human capacity of knowing something, and then you will learn how to do it, and actualizing a potential of being able to do that, right? Otherwise it couldn't happen. And then you actually do it. By actually doing is also an actualization of the ability, the learning that you have, right? When I learn, do lamdas, when I am a lamdan, I'm actualizing the potential of being a lamdan, which is already a second potentiality.
I don't see how that acquisition can
A second,
be universalized.
one second. Of course it could. 1 second.
How did I do it?
1 second. But let's first understand it here, because I didn't understand it yet. Anyways, we're mostly talking about humans. Okay. So he actually, and at least for the life of the body, he's using the same analogy. He's just working with this, right? Point is, this is the point. That's why I told you this is a problem. This is something that we need. It's a question. But the point is, it's just like everything according to him is said in many ways. So actual and potential have different kinds of quality to them. There's not only one kind of actual and one kind of potential. There's at least two kinds. Well, no, both of these are potential of each other. So sometimes we call it the first. There's 1, 2, 3. What 2 can be called second potentiality or first actuality, right? Depending on where you want to start counting. So you often see him. Usually he calls the second one the first actuality and the second one the second actuality. Which are not very descriptive names, they're just numbers. And why is it called first? It gets into a whole discussion. Point is...
Well, that's the sequence of how it occurs, no?
Exactly, but it's not really that. Yeah, that's why. That's the sequence of how it occurs. In humans, at least, for this example, right? It's not always how it occurs.
I understand, for a bike...
Okay, it's the same thing with a bike. So a bike is not a natural object, so we have to think of, if not a natural object, have things like this. But at least if you assume that the activity of a bike is to be ridden, which is someone else doing something to it. But then there's actually three things, because a bike can be a bike. In other words, the matter it's made out of can be a bike. You take metal and form it into a bike, okay? And then it's a bike, so it has potential to be a bike, but then it's actually a bike. Now, or... riding a bike, we have to get to this, that this is really the big thing, because we have to distinguish between non-natural things or artifacts and natural things or natural living things, which is what we're looking for. But the point is, but for an example, for let's say something different, for what a bike really is. In other words, a bike doesn't really exist according to him, because it's a fake, it's artificial, which means it's not a natural thing. So if you take a natural thing like a rack, well, now all these distinctions, you have to remember these distinctions are not really in time, right? So a rack also has these three things, because a rack has a nature. Nature means it has a certain principle of movement inherent to it, right? In other words, racks fall down. Okay, racks fall down because the nature of racks is to fall down. And this falling down is not always actualized, right? It's not always falling down. So a rack is already three things. A rack is the matter of the rack. Because maybe we could take a rack, and of course, according to him, you could make a rack into water too, into anything, not only into sand, even into water. It's very important to him. The elements can change into each other, which shows that they're not the base. I think that's one of his big things. Because if you could stop by the elements, at least the standard model physics, standard physics stops by like something, then you don't have to have this whole problem, because you could stop. There's something that stops our problems. But he thinks that you can't, and that never stops, because elements can change into each other. So elements are not basic things. But the point is, anyways, I'm not getting that. This is random. The point is that a rack. It has matter. In other words, it can become anything else, or maybe it even has a certain kind of matter, like we discussed. But that's not the point now. And it also has a nature, right? In other words, it has a form, which is that it falls down. But it's not always falling down, maybe in some sense, but not actually always falling down. There's at least a difference between a rock falling and a rock laying on the floor. You could say, and this is a question that I had. You could say that a rock is always falling. It just now there's something stopping it, so to speak. But he doesn't seem to think like that. He thinks that rocks sometimes fall and sometimes don't fall. And when they're falling, then they're actually actual. But all the other time, they're potentially actual. Okay.
But that's not talking about a falling rock.
What? But he definitely thinks the same.
If a rock is necessarily falling,
part of being a rock is that it falls. Yeah, okay. That's the form of the rock, that it falls. That's the nature of the rock, that it falls.
Or it goes up if I throw it.
No, that's not a natural thing. Then it's being forced, because it would fall back down, right? That's what proves to us that it really wants. Want is a weird word, but it really wants to fall. It doesn't want to go up. You need to force it to go up. When the second you stop forcing it, it falls down. At least according to his theory of motion, his theory of mechanics. Newton doesn't think that, but that's what he thinks, okay? Kesdrem is that there's two ways of being actual. This is a very important difference for him. Now, so these are basically our four boxes that we have to decide how to apply.
The potential and the actual are much more interrelated, right? Well, I shouldn't say interrelated, but they definitely.
What is interrelated?
Like let's put it this way: to be a guitarist and to play guitar, it's clearly articulated in the actual is very clearly articulated in the potential. The potential is only potential qua actual, right?
That's why it's a different. I don't know what that means. That's why it's a very different. That's actually now you understand why it makes sense to have this distinction, because it's very different. When I say you're potentially a guitarist, that's why it's a different kind of thing. It's not just like
it's not the same way of saying a guitarist is potentially a pianist, right? Because the potential is related to the activity in a very direct way, right?
That's why it's halfway. This is like a middle thing between actual and potential. That's why we call it first and second. First activity, first actuality, which is second potentiality, right? Okay. That's why we call this middle thing. Sometimes if you want to look at it from the potential side, you could call it potential. Exactly because of that, because it's very different to be a potential pianist when you're, or like your example, like it's very different to be a potential guitarist because you're a little boy. That all little boys can be guitarists, and being a guitarist who's not actually playing. But both of these are this is very important because for him, this is very important for ethics, and this is where I was going to say that Rambam uses it and others. This is very important because for him being a complete human, and actual is just another word for complete, by the way. It's actual, the Greek word is complete. And to be a complete human means actualizing all the human potentials, or the human potential. And which means you have to be active. This is very, very big thing for him. In other words, and people get confused about this because Aristotle and everyone after him says that the point of being a human, the goal, the end, is to know. And they don't realize what knowing means. Knowing doesn't mean potentially to know. And that means, and this is the Rambam talks about this in the end of his book, the last Perek Nun Aleph Chelek Gimel. And what that means is, but Aristotle is very clear about this also, that the best life for a human is to think, not to know. And he explicitly makes this difference. And also Aristotle in the end of ethics. The best life for a human is to think and not to know. In other words, he has to know also. So he does say the opposite thing also. You need to know. You need to be thinking something you know. Because if you're thinking in order to know, that's a lower thinking.
Stuck in second potentiality, like
not stuck. It's the opposite of stuck. Okay, you have to be active. Yes, you have to be actively. That's what we could use the difference between actually and actively. You have to be actively thinking. So in other words, if you're to be the Greek philosopher, to have, and we would call it in your memory, right? But it's not only memory. It's being able to potentially think the truth is not yet thinking the truth. Most of like when we do philosophy nowadays, we seem to be aiming only at knowledge and not at thinking. Not at, he calls it contemplation sometimes. Contemplating, meaning why are we thinking? In order to find out the truth, and then what are we going to do with the truth? What's the activity of that? That's only a potential. Knowing the truth is only a potential. Just like nobody thinks. It's very important. Nobody thinks. Let's say you would think that the tachlis hashleimus is to play guitar. Nobody thinks that means knowing how to play guitar. Everyone understands that the point of learning how to play guitar is to actively play guitar. And if you're a big like a shiver lichas kind of thing, right? If you learned being the best guitarist in the world and now you broke your finger and you can't actively play guitar, it's not really worth anything, the whole knowing. When you get some credit like Shiver Lichas Menachem Baron, but you're not doing the active, you're not doing the point, the activity towards the whole learning guitar is geared to, right?
And what does Aristotle think?
And the same thing is if there's a human good, or which is another way of saying it, is an activity or a completion.
He's thinking about truth, right? That's
yes, of course, but that's of course. But the point is that it's not enough to know the truth. You have to think the truth. Because if there's a human completion towards which all human action is geared to, no, there's no circle. There's a circle.
It's a bad circle.
No, there's a circle in the sense, like he calls it inquiry, at least the translation. Okay, but that's a different thing. Okay. That's a totally different thing. That's not what we mean. What we mean.
Okay.
Exactly. It's just the same. There's two thinkings. So we could call it inquiry and thinking. He says to inquire is obviously less than to know. And most people are, he says, in the end of ethics, most people are stuck at inquiring because we don't yet know the truth. Right. And that's psaida. But after knowing, there's an thinking or contemplating.
Right, okay.
And that is obviously the goal, because it's very weird. And this is, I want to say this.
Maintain it in your thinking.
Not to maintain, to think, to actually think.
Right,
no,
okay.
to actually think it. Just, in other words, you have to be very clear. Just if take any analogy to any human goal, to any human goal, it just like it makes no sense to say that the goal of learning how to play guitar is to know how to play guitar, right? People are very confused about this. People seem to think that if there's a goal in knowing, the goal is just to know. There is no goal to know. Just like it doesn't really make sense. That's why most people get very confused when you tell them that Aristotle says the goal of human beings is to know. It's not. It's to contemplate. It's so sometimes you could see it as a difference between philosophy and mysticism, which actually focuses on the practice of thinking. And it's not really mysticism. It just, in other words, I'm just using it as a thing that makes it people. And when people think, people seem to think very often that like making philosophy the goal is making something dead the goal. They're correct, making something passive, because knowing is what do you do with it. Well, if I say, well, the goal is to have dvaikus in the mystical sense, then people understand that I'm talking about something active. That's really what's going on. And the truth is that for every philosopher that ever thought that thinking was the goal, he meant something active also. Because nobody thinks that it's enough to know. The only reason we know, we inquire in order to know, is so we can then think. And thinking is not figuring out the truth, right? That's like you're noticing. Figuring doesn't mean thinking out the truth. We're stuck doing that because nebuch we don't know yet. But to the extent that we know, and the second that we will know, we'll stop thinking in that sense. That's not the point. It's not that having doubts and not knowing the truth is the goal. We're stuck in that, so we praise it because we don't want to get stuck even lower than that. But that's not the goal. The goal is to know the truth, right? And after you know the truth, what do you do with it? Then you contemplate it. And it's hard to describe what that contemplation is. In other words, it turns out to start sounding like just meditate on it, or start sounding like mysticism. Like what do you do after knowing? But it's actually very simple. It's just the activity that knowing is for. The activity that knowing is about. The activity, just like any other human activity. Nobody thinks, I'm going to say that a fourth time. Nobody thinks that learning how to ride a bicycle, there's any use in knowing how to ride a bicycle. You only learn to know in order to ride the bicycle. And you only learn how to think in order to think, not in order to know how to think. And like the issue that guy said, there's no point in being a lamdan. The point is to learn. In order to learn, you need to be a lamdan in the basic sense, because if you don't know how to learn, then you're not learning. But that's the point, and that's an active thing, and that's why being
stuck in, I guess, the
knowing is only a preparation for thinking. Knowing is only preparation. Like Torah is only a preparation for tefillah. If you think of tefillah as thinking the truth, then learning is only a preparation for that. Okay. Philosophy is only a preparation for prayer.
Okay.
In the sense of actively thinking. And the Rambam explicitly uses this language. Nobody notices it. I mean, he actually notices it. Schwartz in his comments. He explicitly uses this language of a second. He actually called it in Hebrew. It was called koach karov, a close potential. So they distinguished in two potentials, koach rachok and koach karov. Close potential and far potential. So far potential is me being able to become a pianist, and close potential is me being a pianist and being able to play the piano. Or me being able to become a lamdan, and me being a lamdan, now I could learn. Another weird place where the Rambam used the same exact terminology, and many people didn't realize, is in interpreting the mitzvahs. The Rambam says, after finishing all of his Tamei mitzvahs, he says, look, I've given you the reasons, or the main reasons, or the most general reasons I could find for all the Klolei mitzvahs, for the general categories in which he thinks the mitzvahs fit in. And now there's some things that I didn't explain, but I think I've gotten you to the close potential to explaining them. And that's exactly the language that he uses. In other words, I've not only, before you read my book, of course you could have potentially read it, and you could have potentially understood what I said. And you also could have potentially explained the things that I don't explain. But according to him, the point of him teaching you, and of course because he wants you to become a chacham medata, he doesn't need to teach you every last detail. That would be dumb. In other words, he doesn't need to activate your learning. What he needs is to activate your ability to learn. Exactly. I think this is the point of all teaching, is to activate your ability to learn. So to get you to his first potential. So his son used the same exact language, like
first potential, right? Okay.
Yeah, second potential or first actual. That's the ethical or practical implication of this distinction between two kinds of potential or two kinds of actual. Yeah, very important difference, because otherwise we have only two, and these are different kinds of things. And yeah. Anyways, that's the basic things that we need to know, I think. And of course, like I said, we need to also know that we'll have to make clear that the other thing that you were talking about, the like facts that he thinks they need to explain, which is that there are living bodies and what they do. Yeah, Kesdrem, we need to actually learn or actually be, and for him that's always this is an interesting thing, and for him always being complete is being active. It's an active thing. It's not a passive thing. Knowing is an active thing. Knowing is a human activity. It's not a human receptivity. And that's another way of saying form, really. But that's another thing.
Does knowing pertain to particular? Is this knowing that's the human final actuality or whatever? This thinking that's the final human thing. Is it thinking about a particular sort of truth?
No, there's only one sort of truth. Okay, but that's another whole truth.
Oh, okay. I'm saying the truth that's least dependent on whatever.
Yeah.
Saying that's what it
truth
is.
Truth is an ontological category.
What?
Yeah, truth is an ontological category. Okay. So the truth of a non-true thing is not true. The scholarship of nonsense is not scholarship, according to Aristotle. And that's another thing that people are totally confused about, because we seem to understand, and the way that we see scholarship or knowledge is just knowing about things. But to him, it's not knowing about things; it's knowing things. Right. And therefore, if you know a lot about nothing or a lot about a stupidity, that's not even considered knowing to him.
Right. I mean, psychologist is not a very prestigious.
Whatever. He does think that you should know everything, but just because everything is in some way true and part of being. But you can't. This is another thing that
it's true about that true thing is what he's trying to find out, right?
No, the true thing.
Right. I'm saying which is true about everything. Because it's true, right?
Yeah, but some things are more true than others.
Sure. I'm saying the truth that a butterfly comes from a cocoon is...
it's important and you should learn it.
It's a less they truth than things change.
He thinks you should learn also about butterflies, but they are lower in his hierarchy of truth.
He wants you to think about God.
For sure. The ethics that ends in contemplating is that's how everyone understood it, at least.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
But they're very important. That's not knowing God. Knowing is not enough. So this is another whole thing, and we have to really. I'm just getting into this. I'm finished here. I'm stopping. But like we always talk about how belief versus knowledge, right? Where most people are happy with belief and they don't really care about knowledge. And according to all these philosophers, you only get knowledge by proof or by deduction or by demonstration. And in other words, knowledge is not the same exact thing as certainty, or like believing certainly is not knowledge. You need to know that or know why, right? That's really how I say it. You know why it's so and why it can't be otherwise. The knowing has to have a quality of truth to it, not only the object known. Now,
and especially if I know about something that is a total accident, like even its form is an accident in some sense. Like I don't know. Let's see.
Yeah, according to Aristotle, you cannot know that. It's not something that you could know because it can't. It could be precisely because it doesn't have to be the way it is.
Right.
It's not something that you can know, because knowing means knowing why it's the way it is.
Something you can know about. Let's say.
I don't know what would mean knowing about.
You could know about computers, but it's a weird thing to say that people say I know computers, but to say I know the nature of the world, let's say, or I know mathematics, it's very different than saying I know about questions.
Yeah, I'm not sure what knowing about.
I can make up a subject and know a lot about it, right?
I don't understand this word about though. I'm just
trying to use it to make some space in my head.
Yeah, but I don't know what means knowing about. Just understand this word.
No, I mean to say that the about can be much more rooted, right? Because I can make up a whole language and know it. Right, not even language. It's maybe a bad thing to do because that's a very bad example. But I can make up a whole subject called quotentiality, which is
but there's nothing to be known. It's not a knowledge.
Right, that's what I'm saying. But in some sense, that's just the most outdistanced thing, right? Because it totally doesn't exist.
Yeah. So what's the point? It doesn't exist in your mind, so something. But
okay, but I'm saying is, but that's like the most outdistanced thing, versus let's say knowing about insects is already knowing about a thing of the world.
Yeah, it's a real thing. Maybe it just doesn't. There doesn't have to be so.
And knowing about insects is better than knowing about butterflies, right? Because
maybe.
butterflies is only one example.
Yeah, according to him. Yeah, according to him. Yeah.
And knowing about living things is better than knowing about insects, right? And
yes. Okay. Okay. What's the? What? Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just trying to.
Yeah, I agree with
I'm
that.
doing this for my own clarity.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's true. So the thing is that the question is if this difference between, but now there's another distinction that's very important, which is knowing that, or you could call it something like that, and thinking. You have to call it thinking in different or contemplating. Knowing versus contemplating, and that now contemplating is the activity, and the bayah with contemplating is that humans are very limited. This is what leads us to think of God as always thinking. Because, and this is very interesting, our like it's always true, right? Our knowledge is always broader than our thinking. You could know a lot of things, but you can more or less think only one thing at a time, which is basically the problem with human thinking, why it's such a small thing. It's not a problem with human knowledge. People seem to again confuse this, like we can know, maybe, theoretically maybe we can know everything if you have enough time to learn everything. You could know everything in the sense of like remember everything, but you can't think everything. You could think one thing at a time, I think. Maybe 2 things at a time, but not more. Maybe 7 things at a time. I don't know, not more than that. Depending what you call at a time. And now there was a question. This is the question really. I need him to talk about this. There's a question if the knowing that. What is the relation between that and thinking? In contemplating, I don't know the answer right now. In other words, it seems to most people that that knowing versus believing, right, versus having opinions in the ancient language, is only useful for knowing and not for thinking, because you could think things that you believe in, both things that you don't believe. But of course, that's not true because then you're thinking something that doesn't exist, so you're not really thinking. You just think that you're thinking. No, you're imagining. That's otherwise known as thinking that you're thinking and not really thinking. Okay, so that's an external reason. But is there an internal reason? Like, is there something where knowing that something is also going to cause
it's just first actuality of contemplation, right?
Yeah, I understand.
Right. So
you need to go in these steps according to that, but I'm not sure why. In other words, let's say there's someone else that tells me. The question of taqlid, right? Let's say there's someone, but that's not a problem. Let's say there's someone else that assures me that it's true. Okay, and I don't have any doubt that whatever this guy tells me is true. So could I skip the thinking now? That's really the question. That's the question of taqlid, the question of tradition, basically. That's a serious question.
Meaning, let's say I think about, it's hard to say because
usually the problem with knowing because someone else told me is that you don't know. You just know that someone else told you. But
let's see, what do you think about when you daven? So, guys, you think about the Rebbeinu Shlomo, right? And what's the content of that thought besides the word? All he gave me was a word with nothing corresponding to it.
Let's say you could have a content.
I think about the word. I think about the word. Okay, and let's say I have a different language and now has the word in a different language. And now is the kavuna gone? Like, what's uniting all these words? Some kind of concept that it's referring to.
Okay, so
if I know what it's referring to, then I know it.
So this is a good question. So this is a good question. Also, I'm not sure if it's true, because is there a difference between proving concepts and making them? Or is it the same exact thing? The people, the Rambam people want to think so, but I don't know.
What?
They want to think like what you're saying. That there's no difference. In other words, that's
just a way of establishing the truth.
That proof. No.
I shouldn't even say establishing. It's creating the truth of something.
Exactly.
Right.
Not only the truth, it's creating the understanding of it.
That's for sure.
So it's not like you have this statement.
It has to be learned.
According to them, it's not like you have this statement. Now we just have to apply a truth value to it.
Right.
It's the truth value of the statement is born from the proof, from the proving it.
Right.
But That
I want to know if I could prove something that's
is not
real.
entirely true to me. In other words, it's not. I don't know how true that is. Maybe it's true. Why? Who says that? What is it? Like, can I explain you a concept without explaining you the proof for it? Is the Aristotle does think so? Is the understanding of a concept identical with the proving it, like with the defining it? Aristotle wants that to be the case. Yes, I'm not sure he's correct. Maybe you just let's say you have an essential, like a Plato's thing, like let's the Platonist kind of thing. Let's say you have an inherent an understanding of a concept. It doesn't mean that it's true. It just means that you have the understanding of it. Now you could think it. You're not sure that it's true. You could even yourself not be sure that it's true. But you definitely don't. It's definitely not an empty word to you, right? This maybe goes back to the question if we have inherent concepts. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But that's a random question.
Yeah, just to return, and I know it's going to sound distracting and stupid. I'm just curious because it happens to be a little on the subject that I whatever. Locke has this difference between what he calls what is it, first principles and second principles, right?
I don't know.
His words, where he says that like, and he tries to, and it's kind of weird because he puts half of the accidents in the mind and half of the accidents.
Oh, you mean secondary properties? Okay.
Sorry, secondary properties and first properties. That's a variation on the Aristotelian thing that kind of solves nothing, right?
I don't know.
Because
I don't know.
He'll say like a book is heavy whether or not it feels so, and it's square whether or not it looks so, but it's definitely not. It's blue only because I see so. And it's
okay.
Whatever,
what's the
because it's.
Well, what's the problem? What's the nikita?
Saying, but that
there's a problem, solution.
No, I'm just saying is that I don't. It doesn't solve Aristotle's problem at all, right? Meaning it doesn't do any favors. It's just an assumption, right? I remember he had some title about it that I wasn't falling for.
It doesn't solve which problem?
I mean, not only a problem, but I'm saying the explanatory function that these things have of a way for it to exist. These categories are just extra, right? You don't need.
No.
I'm saying it's just I could say that there are, and it I don't remember where I was going with it. There was a time when I was thinking about it. Now I just know it, so I have to get back to thinking about it.
Exactly. See, that's why I say that thinking is very limited.
Yeah, it is very limited. It's shockingly limited. Especially if you're like me and prone to distraction and you can't complete the thought, so it's really just knowing.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely think I now know how to think about the Aristotelian concepts better. I think before I knew, substance, accident.
Oh, okay.
I didn't
yeah, that's
think
true.
I wasn't able to think them.
That's true, but see,
but if these are not true,
because for these kinds of concepts, it seems to be true. Maybe these are not the best kinds of concepts.
Right.
It seems to be true that certain kind of concepts you can't really think about because they are their proofs. But is that true for concepts as such? I don't know.
Right, I mean, you can know words and you can know the basic behaviors that they have in sentences.
Okay.
I'm saying is, I could say it. Look, let's put it this way. Before this class, right, I knew Aristotle has a theory of matter and form, and I knew he has a theory of substance and accident, and I knew he has a theory of potentiality and actuality, and what was the fourth thing? I knew it, but now
two kinds of accidents. Two kinds of potential.
Two kinds of potential.
Two kinds of potential.
All these things I
That's my four things in my class today.
Didn't mean anything to me. No, I just knew that Aristotle used those words for things.
Okay.
And I could have even told you a few things
okay.
about it.
So it's true. Okay, so wait. So now, very good, very good. So now teaching, it's true that teaching...
has two tutti fruitis and it doesn't mean anything, right? This is actually what grounds the words into the concept,
we have to figure this out. This gets us into all these questions. Yeah.
All I know is that this guy who's named Aristotle, and he said that things have two principles, but that offers me nothing, right?
No, it's true what you're saying. You could not think it. At least you could not think it in a certain sense. You could think it like you said. You could repeat the words to yourself 100 times. Remember it.
Listen, people say think about God when you daven. Okay.
I heard that.
God, word.
You could put your words in your mind a lot of times.
I could think about the word Elohim. I could write it down in my
mind. What if I say Jesus? Is it going to change anything?
Right.
Probably not.
No.
I mean, hopefully the people that say Jesus, they mean the same thing, so you might as well. Anyways, the point is, but that's not, again, is this thinking the same as the difference between potentially thinking and actually thinking? secondly potential? That's the question.
I don't even think so, because maybe I think it's a first order. I think it's a first potential and not even a second potential, because you can have an unlimited amount of words that correspond to the same thing.
Wait, that's not true. But that's not true. Like you're saying, the whole point of teaching you is to get you to being able to learn, to think.
Okay, but it's tricky how that happens.
If I'm not, then I'm not teaching you at all. If I'm not teaching you at all, I understand. If someone's not even telling you the proofs, it's just giving you words, then he's not even giving you.
But it's words arranged in a way that allows these things to be coherent, right? Or that gives it its first actuality of coherence.
So again, let's go back to the singing example or the playing example. I could teach you to play piano,
right,
by telling you, look, a piano is this weird thing with 47 keys,
right? But that's
and you memorize all of that, and you'll sit on a piano, you'll have no idea what to do because nobody ever taught practice with you. So that's not teaching at all. That's I don't even know what it is. Maybe it's some kind of potential of a potential, but it's not even giving you the knowledge of playing piano. It's giving you the knowledge of some theory maybe, which is somehow related to piano. It's not giving you the knowledge of playing piano, right? And maybe that's what more analogous to someone just giving you words like tradition. But so again, back to my inherent concepts things. If you do have inherently a way to play piano, then I just need to give you the words, and it's going to help you. Or that just locating the beginning somewhere else.
Not always, right? Yeah, I don't know if I'd go for that. I'd say that you definitely have to. You have to imbue whatever words you're doing somehow, and again, maybe this is just a matter of form and a change idea, but you have to give it explanatory strength, right? Yeah,
but because the words because they connect to something. Every time I speak to you, every time I speak to you,
the first potential.
Yeah, every time I speak to you, the words that I tell you connect to something you already know. That's always that true. Otherwise, I'm sure you can imagine someone literally learning words, has no idea what he's saying, but I don't think that really what happens ever.
It's funny, right? There's a whole machlikus in linguistics, right? If language is, even though it's limited in whatever, is it unlimited in scope? And now I think they say, yeah, it actually is unlimited in scope.
Even a Kimmel, that people say, he's just saying words. At least in some sense, they connect to something that he thinks. Maybe he's thinking in a very fuzzy way, but it's not really true that it's just empty things. Anyways, ich weiß nicht. If the reason why people also could be that this contemplation is like a whole. This is another question. Is it a separate chachma? People nowadays seem to think that it's separate chachma. Okay, I don't know. I'm stopping here. Because you need to learn how to concentrate, but you need to learn how to concentrate for anything anyways. That's a whole different thing. That's true.
Yeah, that's actually a weird.
You do need to learn how to concentrate.
Yeah, but that's not a second potential. That's not a second potential in the way we're thinking about it, right? No. Because that's not connected to the content of your thought. That's just a regular potential actual...
that itself would have... That itself would have... I could teach you how to meditate, and then you could actually be meditating. That's a whole different... It's different knowledge. It's the art, basically. It's a thing to do. But that's not relevant to what you're teaching, right? To what you're learning.
Right.
Although the Rambam does seem to give a whole instructions in the end of his book about just precisely that, like how to concentrate.
Okay, but that's more practical advice than practical advice.
But is it because
it's like saying don't sleep too much because then you're not going to be awake enough to think, have enough time.
Yeah, so is it because
it's very auxiliary.
Is it like that? Then it seems like he's wasting his time. I don't know.
Well, I think concentrating I would say it's a weird thing because it's just maintaining something for duration, right? Maybe it's a good idea to exercise helps me concentrate. Happens to me.
Besides, these are all good things. But what I'm saying is maybe there's something you want.
Teach concentration is. It's too auxiliary, I think. It's not. It doesn't.
But maybe there's some kind of real way.
But of course, between concentration and knowing.
Yeah, exactly.
Or concentration and thinking.
And knowing. In other words, maybe what I'm trying to get at, and I'm just making stuff up right now, but maybe there's otherwise known as doing philosophy. Maybe there's some sense. Maybe that's true that people that don't know can't think. That's what I'm trying to get at. Not only because of these definitional things, because what are you thinking, or how do you know that what you're thinking is true, or you're just thinking empty words? No, because in other words, what I'm saying is, how is that? This is really what I'm saying. How is the actually thinking the actualization of the thinking? If the actually thinking is just contemplation, you got my question. You understand?
One more time. How is the...
Okay, this is really what now I understand why I got to this question.
Okay.
We just said that actually think. I don't know.
Actually thinking.
Okay, actively. I want to say actively. Okay, actively thinking is the actualization of knowing to think, right?
Okay, now I have to.
Of knowing, actively think. This is the second. That's just again. Just
we're making more steps here, right?
No. The second and third thing. Okay, the actively thinking is an actualization of knowing. Okay.
Okay.
Me knowing the stars. I know I went to astronomy class. I know how many stars there are. Now I could contemplate the stars. Okay.
But I don't just know what the stars are. It's weird because it
so exactly. So wait. So this is exactly. So now, what is this relation exactly? Is it like any other? It needs to be an essential relation. You can't say it's like, well, I didn't know what to think about, and now I have what to think about, right? Because it's again the analogy of art makes a lot more sense, right? It's like
that's what's weird.
In the
if I know
same
the
way,
thinking, then I'm thinking, right? That's what you're saying. If I know the thinking,
no, that I can understand because I'm sleeping. No, he uses the word.
I don't want to know stars meaning. I don't want to know.
No, that's not a problem. That's not a problem because I'm sleeping. That's like the difference between the difference between sleeping and being awake. Okay. When you're sleeping, you could think, and if you're a mathematician, you could do math, but you're not doing math, right? So you're not a mathematician when you sleep.
I understand.
Very important that he says you're not a tzaddik when you sleep. That's what the Rambam gets into some radical theory about Ashgacha. Because when you think, you're nothing. You're just like you're not a tzaddik. When you're not thinking, when you're sleeping, you're not a tzaddik. Very important klal. If you go to a tzaddik and he's hanging out, he's eating, drinking coffee, he's not a tzaddik then. Wrong, you found the wrong guy. No, the Rama actually says this, and it's true. He says maybe there's once in a billion years a tzaddik that continues to be a tzaddik when he's drinking coffee, but most of the time they're not. In other words, he could have like in his mind.
Tzaddik.
Exactly. He's better than you. The whole life because he's a second potential tzaddik.
Right. I'm saying
you're just the first potential tzaddik, and he's a second potential tzaddik. Which is another way of saying that he can easily be a tzaddik. If he wants, now he could choose to be a tzaddik.
He has definitely that.
You can't even if you want because you have a whole way to go.
Second potential to be a tzaddik in a way that can be actualized without.
Right. Everything we call about some people being smart or people being tzaddiks is just having second potential.
Right.
Because you still have to actively be a tzaddik.
Mm-hmm.
But now, how exactly is this second potential the cause? Like the potential for the thing? That's what I'm trying to ask. Because if it's like, if like most people, when I usually read you have to read the last chapter in Ma'arichim, okay? Not the last, Perek Nun Aleph, read it 100 times, but read it and you'll see what I'm talking about at least. If the contemplating is just some kind of meditation, and the Ram explicitly has this problem over there, like, why can't you just contemplate without knowing anything? And he gives this answer because you're just imagining, but I feel like there should be a better answer. Because contemplating is the activity of knowing. It's not the activity of something else. And knowing is what makes it, it's just like saying why, if playing piano, well, it's something like this, like playing piano is something that you do with your fingers, so all you need to have really is to know how to move your fingers quickly. And that's nonsense, right? Because that's true, obviously true, it's necessary to have fingers. But playing piano is knowing how to move your fingers in the form, like in the way.
He wants it to be the actualization of something, right?
Exactly.
Not just actualization coming in
the way
from
of
space, right?
In the way, exactly. You have to let me finish the sentence. In the way that a piano is played. In other words, if I didn't learn how to play piano, I literally could not move my fingers in that way, and that's what allows me to move my fingers in that way. In the same way, thinking, if I didn't learn that it is such, that the truth is such, I literally can't think. Not because I don't know, I don't have the machinery to think. That's a whole different discussion, like you're saying, it's not relevant. Just like I need to have fingers to play piano, but that's not the potentiality to play piano is not having fingers. Again, that's maybe a first, but it's a lot of things, but that's not what we're talking about. It's having the knowledge of how to move my fingers in the way that's playing piano. And the same way, so in other words, another way of saying this would be that it turns out that contemplating is actually contemplating proof and not contemplating truth, which is weird.
Well, contemplating truth as it is a product of proof.
No, but you can't, there's never a stage where like, we just need to find out if this is true.
You're not contemplating the proving, you're contemplating the
No,
proof.
you are. Exactly, but you are by proving it.
Right, okay, but I'm saying is...
And there's no other way.
But the proving it is
and there's no other way.
The proving it is a potentially
something
proved.
Weird. There's something weird here.
Saying is, but the proving is potentially proved, right? It's definitely... Proving has a result, which is the proved.
No. What do you mean? What's knowledge? No.
So
knowledge is knowing the proof. Proving
follows a sequence, right? Proving always has a sequential element to it, and the final stage of that sequence is the proved.
Yeah, but how do we like?
So at which stage of the proving do I want to be thinking? The proved, as it is a product of proving.
No, but then again, how is that the guy that's playing
I'm not thinking about the truth. I'm thinking about the
He
proved
doesn't
truth,
forget.
right?
This, let's try to say something. You can't throw away the ladder. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, for sure not. Right,
Why not?
So,
but why
then you're
not?
not thinking about the proof. Then you're thinking about something that can be.
Well, it's the result.
From it.
It's the result of the proof. Okay, but it's the result.
But it's a result that's contingent on that continuing process.
Why? Why do you have to continue the process?
Because then it's not the proved. Then it's just something which may or may not be true. And
it doesn't seem to be true, because if I would be an angel, again, proofs is a human problem. For example, if I would be an angel that just knows things directly, I wouldn't need proofs.
Okay, but knowing them directly is because they're known by proving, right?
No.
So how else would I know? By perception?
Something like that, yeah.
Okay, if you reach, maybe there is a stage that can be reached where the truth can be perceived, but that perception is only possible by proving. And again, if I can maintain the relationship with the truth that proving provides directly with the known, right? Then maybe. So
this is the
thing, but it has to be that kind. I can't be thinking about God the Word. I have to be thinking about God the proved essence, right? That I'm trying to think about.
Okay, we have to go back to the analytics to know this. Basically, that's the answer. Okay, I see. To figure out if definitions and so on, whatever knowing are just the results of proof, or they are the proof, and what's the relation between that? He has things to say about this, Aristotle. That's the question, really. The Rambam Chassidim that are going around and thinking about God, are they like chazering proofs for God's existence? That's what they're doing? It sounds like a weird thing to say, but it seems like what he says. Right? Or you would say they are activating the knowledge of God that they have achieved by the way of proof, and now they wouldn't say it in the sequence of proof, but it would be like a backward sequence. Like Aristotle often says, like a definition is just a syllogism backwards.
They're thinking about the proven.
Yeah, but which is the same content as the proof, just backwards. To be clear.
I understand, but I'm saying is you're thinking about the final sequence of proving, right? Or whatever proving is.
The proved thing, yeah, the definition that we got from the proof, which is the same thing, just in a different order, and therefore I don't need to go through the order that I went through before, but it's the same thing. Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
Something like that, maybe. Anyway, it's shine. Now we could apply all of that to what a soul is, maybe, hopefully one day.
Mental